Hi, everyone. Rebecca here at QA.tech. Signing on quickly, we will officially start in just 2 minutes. This is essentially just a quick admin technical check-in and walkthrough of the tool. Thank you, everyone who joined today. I see we already have some action in the chat. Hi, Chris. So throughout this webinar, I do just want to mention some admin things for Univid. The tool that we're using right now to host. So on the right side of your screen, you will see a chat. If at any point you can't hear us, you want us to maybe go into something a bit more deeper, you have any feedback that you want to share, please use the chat. We will also have a Q&A session at the end of the webinar. So please go ahead and add in your questions to the chat so we make sure that they get answered. I saw a thumbs up as well. So if at any point you like what we're saying, keep the thumbs up coming in. We'll take all the engagement as we can. We want to make this as much as an interactive session as possible. So in just one moment, Daniel will come back and we will go live and discuss the key theme today, which is closing the verification gap. So keeping quality when development outruns your test suite. So just one more minute, grab some coffee, grab a water, and we'll go live. Okay, looks like the time has come. 4 o'clock on the dot. Hi, Daniel, how are you?
I'm good, how are you?
I'm doing very well.
I'm excited to be here, yeah.
Me too. You guys, this is our first, I think, official webinar. So I think first things first, let's go into some quick intros. I'm Rebecca Black. I work in enterprise sales here at QA.tech, essentially helping our customers implement our tool to make their testing much quicker and close the gap that we're going to be discussing during this webinar. With me is Daniel, our CEO. Daniel, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Yeah, nice to meet you, everybody. Yes, I'm Daniel Mauno Pettersson, based here in Stockholm, Sweden. My background is I've been a CTO for almost 20 years now in different startups and fintechs, mostly here in Stockholm. Always lean towards building new things and have really liked that part. And I've really been inspired by everything that's happening now with AI. That really enables people to move much faster. And why we've settled on working with QA and why we focused on that was mostly because that was something we always struggled with in our previous companies that I've been at. So whenever I was in fintech, I always kind of assumed that QA had to be really complicated and really involved, especially, you had to know accounting or different compliance things for testing these fintech services. But at my previous company, I was building a B2C marketplace where it was essentially just an e-com. And still, the testing was so complicated. And especially when we were starting to grow, we were in multiple markets with different payment methods, different setups, different regulations, and so on. So even then, with something that felt as solved as an e-com, testing was still a pain. And we ended up using a bunch of different methods to try to test things, everything with test and integration tests, of course, but we essentially ended up relying a lot on manual testing to be able to test everything, as the users were experiencing it in different locales, different markets, and so on. And that kind of led us to explore this more, because AI really opens up for these kind of use cases where you can test things more dynamically. That was really hard to test previously.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we go into the problem, I think we want to give a sense of really where we're headed, because this is really going to reframe everything that we're going to talk about today. So on this next slide, Daniel, when we talk about the future, we say a pretty bold statement, which is QA in its old form is dead. And in its place comes something far more valuable. So can you just elaborate what is going to take place of former QA testing? What's the future looking like?
What we believe in it is, at least, that we really want to shift quality more towards to what the end users are actually seeing. So this means really understand what your users are experiencing and testing things as close to your production environments as possible. So really move away from mocking interfaces and like testing in your own tiny little box, but actually test what the users are seeing. And we believe that is doable with agents. And we also believe this opens up for a new kind of testing, which we call more agentic testing or dynamic testing, which essentially is testing what really matters just in time as you're building it. So it's instead of having and maintaining large regression suites, you end up actually testing what you are building in real time and giving feedback both to the builder faster, which leads to better developer experience and also increased velocity. But this also moves you towards more of a product excellence, where you actually can really care about how your end users are experiencing your product, which means that you can have, a better product essentially. So higher retention, better conversion rates, lower churn, and if you want to go even further into the future, I think what we really will see is more self-improving products overall, where we see more loops, where feedback or signals that we get from our users in terms of, rage clicks or anything that is, lost checkout carts and so on, we can actually look at that, act on it, have agents fixing it, and then have other agents actually verifying those changes, and thus being able to move so much faster.
That's a really great segue, Daniel, actually into our agenda. So for the next 45 minutes, we are going to dig into this gap. So why it exists, why AI changes the equation, and where QA.tech is going to fit in. We're going to cover 3 pain points that we're constantly seeing, specifically me working in sales across our customers. We're going to walk through how other teams have actually implemented QA.tech. And then we're going to show you the agents in action through a live demo. For a bit of a teaser, we have 2 reputable brands here, Lovable and Pricer. I'm sure those of you here are familiar with these names. So we're going to show you what they've done and how they've implemented QA.tech. So you're going to want to stick around for that. But let's go ahead and jump in to the problem, to the verification gap. This is going to be the core of everything that we talk about today. And what I think makes this interesting is that this is not necessarily a new problem. Testing has always fallen behind development to some extent, but something has now shifted. And when I'm talking to teams, we see a lot of teams are now using Claude Code, Cursor, all of these AI coding assistants that are drastically accelerating how fast people are shipping. So, Daniel, what does that actually mean for QA testing?
Yeah, that means it's really being stress tested now, especially if you have more of a traditional setup where QA kind of comes in at the end of your development process. I mean, shifting left has always been around as a concept in testing, but has been really hard to achieve for most organizations. And what we see now is this problem is increasing because people are moving faster by adopting AI tools. We also see more non-developers shipping code. So we have a bunch of customers where designers, product managers, or even salespeople sometimes are actually shipping things towards production, which just leads to much more things to test, and even things that might be lower quality or like come from less experienced people, which means like the quality, there's so much more risk of something slipping through with all of these changes. And we can already see this fatigue of people that are reviewing. It's very hard to be meticulous and actually review everything constantly as the number of things change are increasing.
Yeah. We for this presentation, we broke this down into three parts, or 3 beats as we call it. And I think seeing them together, it becomes pretty obvious why this is the moment the system can start to crack. So first we see the QA, the manual QA, role of the QA, which has been largely manual. Interesting figure here that the manual testing market alone takes 31 billion today. So Daniel and I both know this is not a small problem. Second is the manual bottleneck. So because testing requirements scale linearly, which we can see here, every feature you ship is going to be another thing to test. And then third is that AI acceleration. So developers using AI now ship code much quicker. So you've got the volume going up, the complexity going up, and then the same QI processes trying to keep up with it. So that product gap just gets wider and wider with every new release. And Daniel, when you're talking to, let's say, engineering teams, what do you find is the biggest beat or bottleneck that resonates with them?
For engineers, I think it's mostly reviews and actually be able to verify that things are working as expected. Because we have seen code generated tests have been exploding. So I think that makes a lot of sense, especially for simpler things. So if you want to generate unit tests or integration tests, that makes a lot of sense. And that really takes away a lot of the simple bugs that you would encounter. But what that instead happens is that you shift that work towards review and towards actually verifying that things are working as you expect. And that is much more time consuming. So what this means in practice could be that you as an engineer need to check out your coworker's code. You need to actually run through a bunch of different user journeys to really verify that this was intended. And if you if you find something that you think is unintended, that whole communication and back and forth around this and try to figure out if this was the intended change, that takes so much time and so much split focus. So that's the biggest bottleneck for engineers, I'd say. A lot of engineers have shifted away from like writing code to just reviewing code, which is might not be what they signed up for in the first place.
Yeah, it's something I hear very, very commonly in my sales calls, that people right now, they're maintaining scripts, they're rewriting scripts. And this starts to create what we call script maintenance task. And it's fascinating from a sales perspective because no one actually budgets for it. It's invisible. It never shows up on the sprint board. It never gets a ticket, but it eats up, 20 to 30% of QA time. And the end result is that coverage stops growing, and they quietly maintain this instead of actually expanding on what they're testing. Daniel, what's one thing you hear most consistently from teams when it comes to, I guess, scripted testing versus QA.tech?
I think it's very easy to see these scripted tests as a one solution that fits all, because now it's so easy to just write and generate these scripts. But what you end up with is, if you have a really good testing coverage, that also means you will have so many different playwright scripts or Cypress scripts or whatever to maintain. And this means whenever you do a change, you will always have a change in those scripts as well, which means that if you don't trust the change in the first place, you really have to trust the change in the test to actually test what you were intended, the intended change. And this is actually, it's easy to start with, but it becomes unmaintainable really fast over time. So I think just as it has traditionally been with like the testing pyramid, if you're familiar with that, is that it's easy to maintain, those low-level tests, but you kind of want to have fewer high-level tests because they are likely to change often, they are hard to read, and they are hard to maintain. I still think that is kind of how you want to think about scripted tests. You want to have a few end-to-end tests for, the most important user journeys that you want to run over and over again, where time is of the essence, and you just that those journeys doesn't change that much. But then if you think about your product and all the different permutations of user journeys, you have such a long tail of functionality that most users never even touch, or they touch very seldom. That can be your settings pages. It can be, for your less important markets or anything like that. To actually have 100% test coverage in the form of playwright scripts would be completely unmaintainable. And that's where we fit in nicely. We can do these more dynamic tests, where you don't have to maintain them, and since they are much more high level, you can also, they don't change as often.
Yeah, I think that's actually a pretty good segue, because this is really where it starts to compound. because QA was designed for something that doesn't necessarily exist anymore. Those SDL systems are becoming a bit more outdated. So weekly releases, manual sign-off cycles, and actually having some room to breathe between deployments. We find that teams are now shipping far more often, or shipping daily or per PR. Engineers are still opening pull requests faster than ever. So you've got this process that was built for one release or a weekly release trying to gate 10 merges a day, for example. And this doesn't necessarily work with the velocity that we're aiming for. Daniel, just to segue on from this slide deck, what do you actually see happening for companies when they hit a wall like this, where their velocity is farly outpaced by their QA processes? What does that actually look like in practice?
Usually it just means that you're shifting that bottleneck towards testing, or if you are able to ship faster. I think a lot of teams today, not everybody might have hit this wall yet, but everybody has this as their OKRs or KPIs that are trying to increase their velocity. And now management expect it to change. Before it was status quo, you were stuck in your bi-weekly release schedules, but now everybody thinks that you should be able to move much faster due to agentic coding. So this just means you need to step up your process in terms of testing, monitoring, observability, everything, reviews, everything that goes into the SDLC.
Yeah. Yeah, from a higher level as well. At least when I'm talking to customers, there's of course the day to day, but when we look at this from like the overarching perspective, being able to implement something like QA.tech to alleviate all this overhead allows you to have tighter sprints and be able to ship better and quicker, which of course ultimately will lead to higher revenue, happier customers. And then lastly, just to kind of tie in the last of our bottlenecks, this is one that actually Daniel and I were speaking about just earlier. And this is one that I don't think a lot of people talk about because it's more of being seen as more of a technical problem, and also can even become maybe a cultural problem for you and your team. So engineers have to wait for QA to come at the end of production or at the end of their SDLC cycle. So if they catch something, they have to regress this, bring it back to the developers to fix. So Daniel, I think this is a good moment to really go into how QA.tech actually changes this dynamic. So what does it look like when this bottleneck is removed?
Yeah, so QA.tech essentially works in two ways. You can both use this to help with regression suites, of course, but where it really helps is with the more dynamic testing. So you can, whenever you create a new PR or you have an agent working on something, you can ask QA.tech to test it, and you get, an agentic review that goes pretty deep. It's available 24/7, it's fast, and you can get feedback the moment you need it. So you don't have to wait, a day or two or a week to actually get that feedback, and you don't have to context switch. And of course, as any agentic tool, it might not catch everything, but it will give you like 90% of that verification that you need, and that this will just increase as the models become better. But at the same time, if you take away 90% of those simple things, you can just clear those out. That means your QA team will have much more time to focus on the really complex things, or the things that agents can't test today, hardware or other, third-party dependencies or anything like that. So that's kind of the biggest win, I'd say, that people see out of the box, like when they adapt this.
Yeah, it seems to be a common thread, Daniel. I'm seeing a lot of thumbs up and some hearts, so it really seems like this is a common thread that we're hitting. Okay, well now we want to move into the reframe. So how we are actually implementing QA.tech to remove these bottlenecks. So we have the problem, now let's move to the solution. And this is the fundamental shift. So let's go ahead and just kind of bridge back to the scripted test. And Daniel, I know you you already touched on this a bit, but explain just in plain terms what the difference actually is between, let's say, a scripted based test and a goal-based test. What does that feel like for an engineer, let's say, on the day-to-day?
Yeah, absolutely. So scripted test, it's very tightly coupled to a specific implementation of a feature. And it usually relies on a lot of mocked data and mocked interfaces, as well as very deterministic selectors and so on, which makes sense in some cases, but especially when testing more dynamic user journeys, you want it to be more high level. And that's why a lot of testing is still manual, right? Because it's so much easier to have a test case written in English and have a human performing that, because a human doesn't get stuck on those small, tiny changes. If you change a component in a component library, the human will still understand to click the login button, even if it says sign in or if it has moved a few pixels. So this is how we see it. Like, all our test cases are written in English or whatever language you want to write them in, and we write them for you, and we keep it high level. So it's more like user journey. So we try to describe the intents for a user, and we want to verify that those are a user is able to complete those. And then as a side effect of that, we also, since we have all the understanding of of your product, and we collect all the screenshots, all the network logs and so on, then we can also analyze that and give you more thorough feedback and more nuanced feedback on the user journeys. That is not only like blocking things, but actually things that you might be visual regressions, copy errors, or anything like that.
Yeah, I also think, similar experience to, a developer creates something, it works perfectly well in their environment, QA runs it, maybe we find a bug. Something great that we'll actually show you in the demo is that you can actually see those visual steps to see, okay, what was this path? And like Daniel said, if the UI changes, the tool is going to adapt just based on that goal-oriented path. So I think it's far more adaptable, and it's really going to save some time. So guardrails, this is one I find quite interesting because it doesn't necessarily matter how you're coding. It could be a prompt, it could be with AI. But Daniel, why is it these independent checks important, more specifically now with AI supporting and running code?
Yeah, and this is kind of similar to the first one, actually. But since we act as a regular user, we don't look at your code, we don't look at the DOM, we don't care about how it works behind the scenes. We just interact with it. So we bring it up in a browser or on a mobile device, and we use mostly visual models to understand and look at your product and interact with it. And that means it doesn't matter like how you have generated this code, if it's a legacy in the application that's been around for ages, or if it's a vibe coded tool that you built the other day, or if it's like crafted nice selectors that you are building. Doesn't really matter for our agent. We just interact with it as a user would, and by doing this, we can also add other types of guardrails, of course. So it doesn't only have to be the regular user journeys, but we can also add other types of agents that assess things like performance. We can look at the network logs. So we can look at it from from a compliance perspective, and make sure we never show you we never track anything before you have accepted the cookies and so on. So essentially, you can have anything that a human would be able to verify as part of these rules, design guidelines.
Yeah, it definitely understands the product first as well. So like you said, in terms of intention and goal-based testing against those critical flows. So Daniel, maybe walk us through what happens from day one. So once you set up, once we start to test your site, what's that process like? And of course, we're going to see that on the demo, but just to give a bit of a teaser now.
No, of course. But so there's a lot of web browsing tools out there, and to really make this stable and like solid and fast, we really came to the understanding when we started 3 years ago that context is key for everything. We need to understand your product. We need to understand how it fits together and like how to get between different places in your product. So, and if you task an agent with something simple like send an invoice and it's presented with a login screen, how will it know that it first need to log in and then go to this page and so on? And we solved this by building up this knowledge graph. So it's essentially a sitemap on steroids, where we have collected every screenshot, every PR, everything, every conversation that you have had with your agent. It goes into this context graph where we can it's essentially like the spatial memory of a human. So you have this awareness that you've seen something before. You know how to get between different parts of your application, and you understand how they looked in the past, and you can understand if something has changed in a way that is not intended for this change that you are reviewing. So this really enables our agent to be reliable and fast compared to most other tools out there.
Yeah, and the graph just gets smarter and smarter over time. Of course, too, when we show you the demo as well, even once you successfully test, let's say, one critical path, the tool is intuitive enough to make additional suggestions so that the coverage across your application is, as near to 100% as we can get it to. All right, just going back into mapping this to our 3 key points. So what I like about this slide, in part 1, we really focused on those 3 problems: the script maintenance, velocity outpacing QA, and QA becoming the release gate. Goal-based agents are running in pipeline are going to alleviate all 3 of those pain points. And when I'm talking to customers, the biggest pain point I see, or the biggest impact that teams feel immediately, is coverage and time spent. They immediately get a lot of time back. Those sprints cycles can become tighter. They can release quicker. And of course, in the age of AI, going to market is the biggest competitive angle. Daniel, what do you think? What's from your perspective? I know we're going to go into Pricer and Lovable in just a moment, but what are teams, realizing quickly? What's the biggest ROI that, in your opinion, teams are seeing?
Yeah, I think those 2 customers are good examples of 2 different segments of customers. The one is the one that moves really fast and wants to really embrace this dynamic testing, and the other is a company that has always had a need of very thorough testing, but hasn't really, for different reasons, been able to get to that coverage they need, and they have been struggling with automation. And unlike a lot of other teams that do the same, they do an effort, they increase the coverage, then that coverage goes away over time, and they need to make an effort again, but they still hover around a pretty low percentage of coverage that is tested with end-to-end test. So both those cases are very common, I say.
Yeah, we have some figures here just to give some examples. So for the agentic testing in numbers, just as a typical metric we're seeing here is that the regression cycle drops from 2 days, 3 days, potentially even more, depending on how much surface area you want to test, to 2 hours or even less. So that release cadence is going to move much quicker from weekly to daily, like we said before, keeping up a very high competitive angle. And if we just break it down into ROI calculations, this is more of an interactive calculator, again, based on your current structure for how you're testing right now and what the actual impact of QA.tech would be. Daniel, do you want to elaborate on this calculator just a bit? And then let's jump into the use cases.
Yeah, sure. So if you are a team that are looking to invest in test automation, there are, of course, like better and worse cases for this. So the best case of test automation is where you have a really solid product that almost never changes, right? So then you do a one-time setup fee and you get to that test coverage that you need. And to get to that test coverage, we usually do this exercise together with our customers to figure out the ROI. So we can look at what is the cost for a QA engineer in their market, and how much time do they usually estimate to create a test case. And of course, this can vary, but on average, over 6 months, a year, we can put some numbers in here. And if you see that you won't have that many new test cases created per month, then it's quite competitive. But if you actually have a product that is evolving and changing constantly, and you increase this number of new tests per month, you'll see that the ROI calculation becomes really favorable for QA.tech quite fast. And the same goes for manual testing. Like if you have a product, but on the other end. So if you have a product that is quite big, but with very few releases, so the fewer releases you have, then you might, if you only release once or twice per year, and it's not that big of a change, then you probably might be fine with manual testing. But if you want to move fast and you want to have multiple releases, you can't spend, the same manual effort whenever you do a release. So it's very easy to compare this as well. A regular test case execution is somewhere between 10 and 30 minutes on average, depending on the test complexity and how much you need to document during that process. So if you are in a regulated industry like banking or health, then you might need to take screenshots for every step of the way. You need to document this. You need to write down all the steps that you took. And all of that takes so much time. So these are the areas where we really excel and can be really competitive. And over time, yeah.
Yeah, let's see these figures in real time with Pricer and Lovable. Nico, I saw that you asked a question as well. Is this calculator publicly available? It is not, but of course, if you want us to run some numbers against your existing processes right now, at the end of the call, we'll drop a link so you can book a time to speak with us. Otherwise, I'll reach out to you after this demo. I also see that we have some questions coming in. So just to do a pulse check, we're going to go into the use cases, go into the demo, and then after that will be the Q&A. So please go ahead and saturate the Q&A space. All right, so we saw some ROI figures, and let's just go ahead and look at the proof and see how these customers are actually implementing those figures and what kickbacks they've seen. So let's start with Pricer.
Yeah, so Pricer is a product for this provide digital signer solution. So actually, these small price tags that you see in your in any store, essentially, and they have, of course, not only the hardware, but they have all the software to actually power and change these price tags. And the QA team was stretched so thin. They had 9 different applications that they need support, both mobile and iOS and Android, as well as web applications, and of course, actually testing the hardware, which took up most of their time. But they were really suffering now when their engineering team started to ship faster with AI. So we started working with them a few years ago, and since then we've been able to shift a lot of the work from the QA team to actually be a lot of QA is now owned internally by the engineering teams. So they can do a lot of QA on their own, but the QA team is still involved from the QA strategy point of view, but they're able to shift a lot more of their focus towards the things where we can't help out with, like the hardware, for example. And so this is more of a legacy application. They've been around for a long time, a lot of functionality to support, and we started out with just replacing a lot of their existing regression suites and building up a really thorough regression suite for them. And now they are moving more and more towards dynamic testing and connecting it to their pull requests.
Yeah, it's an interesting comparison because we have Pricer that, like you said, quite traditional legacy code, very old school, probably having a tougher time transitioning into the tool and getting started. And then on the other end, we see Lovable, which certainly is a bit more maybe potentially AI native, but
100% AI native, 100% one of the fastest shipping companies I've seen. Do a lot of PRs every day, a lot of changes, and they're expanding like crazy. So with them, we're working much more dynamically. So this means whenever they do a change, they have 250 plus people now. They ship thousands of PRs every month, and each of these changes they still need to be reviewed because they have a lot of real users and they can't ship into production without having it thoroughly tested. So what we do with them is that whenever they do a pull request, our agent will look at that PR, understand the intended changes, go pick up the requirements from the connected issue, and then be able to run a bunch of dynamic tests. And then they still have a human in the loop to just verify that everything seems to be correct. But this kind of alleviates them from having to write a lot of test automation that will be ever growing for all these cases.
Yeah, I think why it fits as well to the plain English case, surviving the constant UI, especially for their end-to-end users, of course, people who are maybe not essentially coders, being able to, of course, make sure that the tool runs as it should. So, okay, 2 great use cases, Pricer and Lovable. Again, just reminding everybody to start filling up the Q&A. And now let's go ahead and actually just see the tool in action. I think this is where everything will start to click.
Yeah.
Daniel, you're up.
Of course. Yes. So QA.tech, this is the dashboard you're presented with. And in the QA.tech, almost everything revolves around the chat. So the chat is your main interface that you can talk with. This is, of course, available over MCP as well, so you can connect to your other AI tools if needed. But a good place to start is usually you can ask the chat, like, how should I improve my test coverage? And what this will do, it will kick off a session where it will talk to our agent. It will search through this knowledge graph and build out an understanding about where you should add more test cases. So I will just jump ahead here. So it will be able to look at, okay, this is where it's lacking test cases, and then it can suggest test cases for you. So you can use this chat to both improve the coverage, but also try to figure out things about your application, like ask it questions like, where can I do this, and which types of users can do that? And based on that, you can use this for both improving your product and also improving your documentation or anything like that. But the most common case is, of course, just generate a bunch of test cases really quickly. And as you can see, since this takes a few minutes, but you don't have to be involved at all. And what you end up with is essentially a bunch of test cases. So here we have 142 test cases in this demo project. And every test case, as I said before, is written in English. So it looks something like this. A test case has a goal, an expected result, and it might have steps related to this. Essentially, it doesn't need them to, but this makes the test cases faster and more stable over time. And this is up to you and the agent to together decide how meticulous you want to be in these steps. Do you want to be very, very thorough and have a user journey that never should change and should cause a regression? If it changes, then you should have very, very specific steps. But if it's more of a functionality that you just want to make sure it works, but you don't really care about the nitty-gritty details of that journey, then you can have a more high-level user journey. And then our agents will interpret these and like execute them. So you will be able to follow along. And we use our own models combined with some foundational models for reasoning to be able to go through these journeys. So we can see here how the agent has like interacted with the website and so on. And so of course you can use this to make dynamic test cases, but as I said before, a lot of our customers, they choose to start with quite traditional testing. So you can combine these test cases and have them you can combine them and add them into test plans. So you can yourself decide what you want to have here. So common things, smoke suites, regression suites, nightly suites, and so on. And for each session here, you can look at the result here. All the test cases can be combined and depend on each other or wait for each other, and you can build out this quite complex testing suites. This also works across applications. So a common thing could be you do something on the web, then you need to switch over to the mobile applications to complete that user journey. Then you sign into Salesforce as an admin to do something to change the state of that user's thing, and so on. And you can really build up these complex scenarios. And we support all of these things that you need to do for a modern application. Anything like two-factor authentication, we can read emails, we can read SMS messages and everything without mocking any interfaces. We can access APIs, we can access MCPs. And this is kind of where I think where we're really trying to separate from everybody else, to be really thorough and really think about this more complex and hard cases that usually is needed to test real applications that aren't just the simpler greenfield projects. And for every test case, if you want to look into a specific one, we always keep track of the network log and the console log and everything like this. So you can use this both when communicating with the chat, and we can use this to analyze regressions or like things that are changing over time. And you can always go through this. So you'll always have perfect context here if something breaks for you or your agent to fix it. And if something fails, you'll always be presented with a kind of a thorough report of what was expected and what's the actual result. And if you think this is false, you can always just go into the chat and ask the chat to fix this if you think this should work in another way. We can also look at test cases across multiple runs or multiple days or longer sessions and try to figure out if there are any flakiness or anything like that, so you can pinpoint where that flakiness is coming from and if there is something you need to work with in your product. There might be a race condition or anything like that you want to look into.
Yeah, we actually have an interesting question, Daniel, in the chat, which I actually think kind of goes hand in hand with the demo. So we had a question or a comment: our regression scripts break every release due to UI changes, making maintenance is painful. Is there an agentic AI approach like self-healing or intent-based testing that auto-adapts scripts without manual fixes?
Yeah, definitely. I think we are in the intent-based testing, right? So you would just describe your UI in a high-level way that is not breaking. So that means, let's say you're testing a sign-up flow, then you can just have a simple goal that says verify that you can sign up as a user. That means our agent will every time interpret it slightly differently if the UI changes. So even if the UI, the sign-up flow looks different, behaves different, as long as you as a user are able to complete it, then our test will pass. And then, of course, you can tweak this to whichever level you prefer, so it works for your specific use case. And this kind of ties into the dynamic testing. So what our philosophy around this is that you shouldn't maintain a huge regression suite, because that just will cost you a lot of tokens to run through the same test over and over again without any changes to it. So we propose that you usually do a smaller set of regressions. So maybe there are 50, 100, or 200 test cases, depending on the complexity of your product. And then you heavily rely on dynamic testing. And dynamic testing means that, so in this case, here we have a pull request in this example repo where we have added display settings to sales pipeline. And QA.tech is able to pick this up and figure out what the intended change were, generate test cases on the fly with goals, and of course combine this with existing regression tests that make sense to test in this setting. So it will generate a bunch of test cases, run through them, and write a report back to you. And if something fails, it also tells you where and what to fix. And you can just put your agent to fix these things, or choose to disregard it and move on with your life. But this is where really what we use the most. Like, I think that where the future lies, like being able to really test thoroughly and dynamically for every change. And of course, you can prompt this. So if you always want to test this as different users, different roles for different languages or different viewports, you can do that as well.
Yes, I think what we just watched in the demo was how we kind of took out all three of the key bottlenecks that we showed earlier. So no scripts to maintain, no scripts to rewrite. Every deployment triggers a full automated run. Test living inside the PR before the code ever merges. This bottleneck is quickly getting alleviated by implementation for QA.tech, which is what we just saw. And of course, we also saw that in practice with those two use cases that we showed before, Lovable and Pricer. So we are just going to jump into, thank you, Daniel, for sharing, jump into the roadmap for what is to come. And this is going to be before we open up that Q&A session. But based on what we're looking at right now, maybe we can get some engagement on the chat. I see we have 18 people left here, but if we're looking at the roadmap, right now we have just scratched the surface. Are there any key features or anything here that is more relevant or something that you'd want to see in, let's say, a next webinar, for example? So agentic testing, test types, creation and coverage for QA, dev workflows, mobile, whatever it may be, throw something in the chat, and we can actually use this feedback post-webinar to make sure that our next session is relevant. While we wait for some engagement, we do have the Q&A open. Daniel, you can see the Q&A, correct?
Yeah, I can.
Okay, perfect. Well, I'll let you lead the Q&A here. So how would you suggest that you strike the balance between where to use unscripted tests and where to use more traditional scripted tests? What do you think?
I think the parts of the more low level you are in your application. So if they have things that there's heavily deterministic, like unit test, I think you should go to town and have as many as possible. And for end-to-end tests, I think you should really limit that to the most critical flows that you really want to test, let's say for every commit or every change. So something that cannot break, and is also something that is pretty stable in your system. So that could be the main user journeys that aren't changing that often. That was what I would recommend. So in numbers, maybe keep your end-to-end tests to like 5, 10, something that you can feel. And if they change and if they break, you really take that seriously and you consider that a problem, and you really make sure that when you change those test cases, it actually works. And then you can test everything else with agentic testing and dynamic testing. That would be my suggestion.
Yeah, usually when I'm talking to customers, there is a combination of the two. Again, just based on the complexity of the application. So it doesn't have to be, one size fits all or one or the other. They can both work very hand in hand to get maximum coverage. So great question, Chris. Thank you. Alexander, one of my current QA issues is an implementation project where QA is about several user organizations end-to-end integration and has V and V cases spanning GUI and API through data, not part of the system developer's SDLC. How do you manage these QA test plans and cases? This is an interesting one.
Yes, of course it's going to vary from case to case, but we usually do this by having test suites that go through these main user journeys, and then you can work with different variables or configs, as we call them in our system, to actually have different types of organizations or different types of integrations as parameters that you pass through these test cases. That's kind of would be my recommendation. With QA.tech, it's easy to test third-party systems like Salesforce or HubSpot and so on. So you can actually you basically will build a test chain of the user journey where you go through all these different cases, and then you permutate that test chain with different types of roles or organizations and so on, if I understood that question correctly.
Yeah, interesting question. But if Alexander, you want to dive a bit deeper into this, please reach out to us. Or otherwise, we can follow up after the webinar, because this might be an interesting case that we want to dive a bit deeper into. All right, just going through the QA queue right now. I'm not seeing any additional questions. We have about 4 minutes left to go. If there are no more additional questions, that's completely fine. We don't have to push it. And of course, we are available outside of this webinar. But following this session, everybody who has attended and those who have registered and were unable to attend will all receive a recorded version. So please feel free to share this internally. If you are interested in opening up a conversation, I will drop right now in our chat a link so you can go ahead and book a demo. You will either speak with myself or another wonderful team member here at QA.tech. And then we can determine whether or not this is a good time to get started or not. Purely discovery, purely understanding your testing pain points. But if it's anything that we've mentioned today, I definitely suggest you guys reaching out and taking a look at the tool against your environments. Daniel, anything else that you want to add on before I close down our session?
I don't think so. It was fun speaking to all of you.
It's a great group, and we're really happy to have you guys for our first webinar. You'll hear from us shortly in the post-webinar outreach, and we hope to see you in another session. We didn't get too much engagement for what do you want to see in the next session, but looks like we're getting some good feedback. So thank you, Dustin. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I appreciate it. We'll see you guys soon.
Bye,
Bye everybody.